So, starting from Odo Sensei at the age of 5, all the way now to being with Shinzato Sensei, who is 80 years old now.
Yeah, 80 years old.
Moves more like a 60-year-old, probably a very fit and active 60-year-old.
Yeah, but still, he's, I would say, one of the fastest, that I know of.
I want to talk about that, if we can, about the styling of Shinzato Sensei, your time with Odo Sensei, Shiroma Sensei, your time in Wushu, your time getting kicked out of at least one Taekwondo studio, and then maybe a Shotokan dojo, and then meeting Sensei Susan, and all the way up to Shinzato Sensei, because I think he's quite unique in what he's teaching, or how he goes about teaching body movement, body dynamics, understanding. The few times I've been there, it's been quite challenging because it goes a little bit against the norm, right, of what we're taught and how to use our body. But I'll let you describe it, because you can do it a heck of a lot better than I can. I'd like to understand the teachings of Shinzato Sensei and how you incorporate certain things from that and what you're doing at Omine Dojo there in San Bruno.
Well, in regards to teaching, the ways of Kishaba Juku, if you will, from Sensei Shinzato, while if it's something that's going to conceptually improve and be adaptable by any level of student, I would share it. So, I would share whatever is better to any student if it's something understood. And that's the catch here, if it can be understood, right? So to find a sense of power or strength by relaxing is just not a concept that anybody's used to. And then the way that it's described more directly, it might make a little more sense in Japanese, but it's to try and make way with having more focus by way of having your body relaxed. Okay, so there's a lot that has to do with your body position and the state that you are moving. So it's the alignment of your skeletal structure and using that as support, while your movements are more in line directly from a anatomically natural or correct position. So there are different movements in various martial arts, that may be more like a hook, for example, like a haymaker type of thing, where you isolate the shoulder more, but it's more about the whipping action, or this rotational weight that is a hopeful impact if you make contact, right? And so there are things like that. Whereas the study of Kishaba Juku within Kishaba Juku is more about always trying to stay in the relaxed state, because muscles only contract. But in order to move, you have to relax before you move, right? So unless the muscle is engaged toward that movement, you can't change direction without changing the group of muscles that you use, and relax some set of muscles as going through the trajectory in one direction, and you shift directions to another direction. So it's to try to understand how the body works, but it's to try and make it the most efficient as possible. Because if you're tight and tense, so Sensei Shinzato would almost be against teaching. It'd be the opposite of teaching Sanchin, for example, right? And the way I describe it to my students is, if you're doing Sanchin or something like that, and you're exhaling, and the breathing part's great to actually try to exercise or to understand. But if your body is tight and stiff, just to take one impact at a time, okay, that's fine. But you don't have anything that's trying to impact you to try and offset your stance. Usually the impact is on the surface, so on the arm, all right? Like breaking a 2x4 across the arm and so forth. That's impressive. Yes, it's impressive. But the strikes from another individual to the one receiving the contacts to the body are never really about punching through the body. It's about hitting the surface and hitting the surface hard. So the individual that's receiving the punch or impact doesn't get moved too far. If they weren't in control of their body in receiving, this is the true essence or sense of the word uke in Japanese. If they're receiving and they're receiving the strike, if they're not conditioned to do so, then they could get hurt, really hurt, right? But imagine this person is tight and is tense from head to toe. You can just push them over because they're like a statue, right? Now you take the same body and you relax it and you push the person. They're going to give and sway with whatever, is impacting them, right? But if they were to receive a punch to the stomach, of course, you have to tighten that region of the body to receive the punch. Now, this is yet now the regional portion of your body that you should be able to control, understanding how sanchin and the method of tightening your body, but it's done independently as opposed to the whole, right? I mean, your muscles don't work as a whole at all. Your mind controls that, but it's about being able to control different parts of your body and try to relax as much as you can. That's a key difference in Sensei Shinzato's method of study.
And I think it's very difficult to understand.
It is. It is. You
difficult
have to
apply, difficult to understand. Yeah.
Because you would listen to it and you say, okay, and you try it. And then, he'll say, no, you're not relaxing, but you think you are, right? So we, with those of us that, have been training karate even for a long time, you don't know what you're doing automatically. And I'm not even talking about autonomic functions. Like you can't just, stop your heart, right? You can slow it down, but you can't stop it. So, there are certain things that you do automatically without thinking, like breathing, swallowing, coughing, sneezing, things like that. It's just like a trigger, right? Something creates that trigger and it happens, right? So it's to understand how your muscles only contract, and you have muscles that are working in opposing direction across one joint. So one muscle relaxes or releases as the other one tightens, and that's what makes your limbs move. But this is how a muscle basically works throughout your whole body, because muscles only contract. So there's always two sets of muscles, a minimum of two sets of muscles that work across the joint. Like how do we even stand upright? We use a lot of muscles to keep us standing upright. There's a general structure within our body, and that's our skeleton, that will, allow us to stand at the right angle with the least amount of effort, but also maintain a certain balance, right? And maintain a certain weight distribution. These are all common things that are part of the basic training and understanding, and just repeated attempts and repeated practice of certain things that you would do to better understand this method of study.
How many years ago did you meet Shinzato Sensei?
5 years ago.
So so the time that I moved back here.
Yes.
Is when you
that
met
year
him.
is when I first met Sensei Shinzato.
Okay. And you've been back every year since and training with him. And I know when you come over here, you're usually there for hours on end.
Yeah.
Has it been difficult for you? Has there been much of a transition for you personally, and then for your students?
It hasn't. Has it been difficult? Yes. as far as transition wise, no, because fortunately, a lot of our concepts are similar. So there are a lot of things that are reflective in the way that I teach as a result of having some experience learning from Sensei Odo, learning from my father, uh, learning, just in general with that mindset or understanding with those two experiences. So let's say, well, but in judo, they have what's called randori, right? It's almost like you're facing your opponent and you're sort of moving and responding to your opponent. You're trying to get into a better position, right? Of taking a person down or throwing them,
Yep.
right? That's randori, right? Speaking of which, from ages 4 to 7, I was in judo as well.
You didn't tell me that.
Before karate.
Oh, actually, I think you probably did.
Yeah, I didn't tell you that. Well, not during this call.
Yeah,
But,
right.
so anyways, there's a certain way to stand, right? And so what I pick up in a lot of, what I see in a lot of karateka, and again, it's just my opinion, my view. It's not that it's right or wrong. It's just different. At least in Okinawa Kempo, Odo Sensei never taught us to lift our feet up off the floor, on regular steps forward, or even in Naihanchi, we're not necessarily picking up our feet off the floor.
Mm-hmm.
You stay in contact with the floor, and you do the same thing in Kishaba Juku.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people, even in Okinawa Kempo, I find that, seisan, pian, katas, and so forth, they're picking their feet up, like clearly off the floor. I mean, like a couple inches off the floor,
Mm-hmm.
which is not, well, in the way that I was trained or taught, was not beneficial to the person doing the kata, and that you should always stay engaged with the floor. This weight shift or tilt of the body shifting from left to right, and more so the wider your stances. If you take it outside of the shoulder with, you get more of that rocking side to side. And, this is energy that could be spent otherwise, beneficial to the next technique, or at least get everything in your body moving toward the technique itself, as opposed to, going side to side. Right? But this is a commonplace in Kishaba Juku, to understand that, really nail that down, to have everything moving toward and moving for that technique. Now, how it differs in all of the experiences that I had was that with jujitsu, traditional jujitsu, my father's style of jujitsu is Shobudo Bujitsu Jujitsu is the name of it. And the way that they move their feet and the way that they stay engaged to the floor is very similar to those of a judoka, and in particular, those that are in kendo or even in Okinawan dance. And it's called suriyashi.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Suriyashi, you definitely stay engaged with the floor. You keep your feet on the floor. And whenever I saw my father with his hakama on, and many of his senior students, the same thing, when their hakama is done, they look like they're floating across the floor because you don't see their feet.
Yeah.
Like, how are they doing this? But that's how they look. Even rotation and turning and so forth, it's just very graceful, right? But they never pick their feet up off the floor. So these are just some of the things. You're asking, well, how did it differ going across all these different experiences of martial arts or martial arts styles, and what makes it harder, or how did it complement what I already do? And learning and training with my dad and having that way of movement was very comfortable to me, since I probably was taught early on how to move and stand like that. So I've always been doing it, and that's common in Kishaba Juku.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how I always moved when I'm doing my kata in Odo Sensei's style.
Okay.
So, there are a lot of things that are very similar. And when I did wushu, just the techniques themselves are very flowing, very circular, much as they are in traditional jiu-jitsu as well.
Yep.
And Sensei Shinzato is all about flowing,
Yep.
circular movements. So that's why I find it comforting to continue training in that. And it always takes me back, and it makes me at least feel more comfortable and more of a sense of um, accomplishment to have done or have been through what I've been through.
Mm-hmm.
Because I see that the older I get, it's going to be harder to learn new things. But at the same time, that's why I feel as though I don't have to say, oh, you're going to just learn this, and these guys are just going to learn this, or I have to choose one or the other. I'm at the point where if a student is able to understand or receive this information and actually apply it, I'll teach them. And generally, those students are in my advanced class.
Mm-hmm.
I don't choose the advanced class just for black belts. I originally did, because I didn't know back then. But I chose who was able to learn and understand, and that were disciplined enough to receive the information and give it a good try.
Mm-hmm.
And so those students I find in the category of an advanced study, an advanced
Mm-hmm.
class.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas others, we just, do the basic katas. And these advanced students are also in those classes too. And with the Matsubayashi katas and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But even how Sensei Shinzato does the katas are also different with this, understanding being relaxed.
Yeah. So let's wrap this up, if you don't mind, Sensei, with your specific dojo in San Bruno. Where can we find information about you online? I assume Facebook, right, is the best way.
All right, Facebook is probably the best way. You can find us also at ominekarate.com. On Facebook, you can look us up at Omine Okinawa Karate Kobudo Dojo, and you'll find us. There you can find anything, especially with the current state of the pandemic we're in. I've been trying to post videos on conditioning, stretching, katas, and so forth, to try and keep my students engaged with their time.
So you're closed at this particular time because you have to be, right?
Right.
In the state of California, and then in out the San Francisco area.
Yes.
But hopefully that'll end sooner rather than later.
Yes,
But when it does end, because it will one day, right? And students want to find you, prospective new students. What age groups are you? What's the youngest student that you?
The youngest I will teach is 4 years old.
4 years old.
Yes, between the ages of 4 and 6, it can be a hit and miss. It really depends on the child, their upbringing, how focused they are. But I'll be really upfront with the parent. If unfortunately, boys are harder to teach at that age than girls. So those of you that have girls, you have been blessed. Not that boys are bad, but even my own son, I started him at 4. It was a real struggle. It's hard to keep him focused. But what I did was, I took a 1-hour class and just made it for a half hour for him. And what he couldn't do, he couldn't do it. So I just let him, stop. And now he's in the full class. And so, with a child, every child is different. So I would have them. I'm very, very lenient about having the children attend 2 or 3 classes and just see how they feel, because it's just as important for me for the student to enjoy what they're doing as much as the parent is trying to push them, because I know that part too. I was one.
Yeah.
I was that child before. But there are some children that just are not interested or won't adapt.
Yep.
And that's okay too. There's tons of time. Yeah. So 4 is the youngest group age, and then that same class might have up to 10-year-olds, depending on their maturity. Between 8 to 12, I'll make a judgment on whether they should be in the adult class or not.
Okay.
And then they'll be in the adult class. And I don't have any separation of ranks or anything like that. Every class has a set, routine of stretching, warm-ups, kihon, katas, and everything. So, everybody gets their time on the floor and instruction with details for their specific levels.
Well, speaking of which, I can hear your son saying now, Dad, you've been talking long enough. So bring us back here to the side view for the last shot. But Sensei, I want to thank you so much. We've been going at this for just over 3 hours, I think. So I'll chop this up into different segments. And but for someone that has 5 decades of training in the martial arts, we could make it even more segments, and perhaps we will in the future. Or maybe next time you're back here in Okinawa, we'll do something together, because typically that's how I like to do the interviews. But thank you very much for taking the time and explaining to us your background, your history with Odo Sensei, starting from a very young age on up to now. So if anybody's looking for some very in-depth martial arts training with what I will say, these are my own words, a very strong emphasis on general body movement, I guess I'll say. Using the body the way it's designed to be used. Go find Pat Sensei there in San Bruno and the folks at the Omine Karate Dojo. Some really great people. And one of these days I'm going to get out there and train with you.
I hope so. You got to get out here. You got to get out here.
Definitely will. But Sensei, thank you so much. Take care of your family. Take care of your students. Please keep posting videos online.
I will. All right. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, guys. And as always, thank you very much for tuning in to the Okinawa Karate Podcast. I am Josh Simmers, coming to you from the birthplace of karate, Okinawa, Japan.